Shalom, shalom, everybody. Ariel Bar Tzadok here from the Kosher Torah School, found online at www.KosherTorah.com. In this class, we're going to delve into a classical book of Jewish Torah commentary to the Torah. This is a rabbi. His name is Menachem Tziyuni. He's from Speyer, Germany, circa late 1400s, maybe early 1500s. He's called a Rishon, which means he's one of the earlier generations of rabbis, and his authority is unquestionable. So he's a big guy. Now, for those of you who are in the traditional Orthodox community, or who have gone to traditional Orthodox yeshivot, you say, well, I know the Rashi commentary, and Ramban, and this one, and that one, and the Mikraot Gedolot. It's the collection of commentaries. I never heard of this one. Well, let me tell you something. Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't make it any less authoritative. Your lack of knowledge does not disqualify the knowledge of this great and holy rabbi. So for those of you who are interested in any historical information about Rabbi Menachem Tziyuni, you can Google his name. I think there's a short little blurb about him on not YouTube, what do they call it? Wikipedia, and some of the other Jewish websites out there. Now, let me tell you something about this book in particular. Of course, it's a very small book. It's here. There it is. That's Sefer Tziyuni on the Torah, and it should be readily available. Which means that if you go to any one of the online Jewish or Hebrew bookstores, apparently that's the way things are done now, you will find this book in the section, Hebrew section, possibly under the Kabbalah section, but should be under Torah commentary sections. If you go to our KosherTorah.com and go to my links page, you'll see that I have a link to purchasing, Hebrew books online. I think it's Sfarim Central. So the rabbi there, Rabbi Nissan, mentioned my name. Tell him this is what you're looking for. He probably can get it for you. So, for those of you who know Hebrew, it's a very interesting book, because Rabbi Tziyuni wrote this book not exclusively on Kabbalah, but the Kabbalistic traditions that he brings down have raised more than a few eyebrows over the centuries. You go, what the heck? And in this week's Torah commentary, again, we're time dating ourselves. This Shabbat coming, we have the double Torah portion of Aharei and Kedushim. And Aharei deals with the very famous halacha of Yom Kippur and the very strange and bizarre Yom Kippur tradition of the scapegoat, of taking the goat to Azazel. And just who and what is Azazel, and what does it mean to have a goat go to him? Well, that is subject to a gazillion different commentaries and the like. But bottom line, when it comes to Torah commentaries, understanding Judaism in general, you will find that we have two different stratas of Judaism. I've written about this many a time. It's interesting. I'm actually listening to an audiobook right now on the history of Greek philosophy and the demarcations between Plato and Aristotle. Very interesting. You would be surprised how much of an influence this has had on all world history. Well, that dichotomy between Plato and Aristotle, we could pretty much water it down and say it's the difference between a spiritual outlook and a physical outlook. I know that could be argued, but that's pretty simple. Right brain versus left brain, if you will. Well, we have always had this same occurrence in Judaism ever since the beginning. So you will have, of course, great scholars amongst our rabbis who are what we call in Hebrew pashtanim, which means pshat. Simple, tell it like it is. And then others who could see deeper into things. Our rabbis of the Talmudic tradition were all of that seeing of the deeper side of things. But like Rabbi Akiva, with regards to the spiritual component, they could, using the metaphor referenced in the Tractate Hagigah, enter and exit the Pardes in peace. Meaning, not only did they speculate about the spiritual world, gee, I wonder what it's like up there. No, they actually walked there. They knew the secrets of expanding human consciousness, and they interacted in what we can call today the Yitziratic plane of our Asiatic universe. And in our last class, I gave you a little foreshadow of a book that I'm writing right now, which is going to deal with the practices of the prophetic Kabbalah, in which I'm going to focus and emphasize on experience, and all this material will be therein. But now, getting back to our understanding here, there is, and always has been in Judaism, two levels, two tiers. The secret level, which we call Sod, and the Pshat level, simplistic level, which we call Pshat. And I am often asked, well, which one's the right one? The answer is, well, they're both right. They've always been there. But with that being said, we also must understand that everything that we call today Jewish mysticism is not necessarily as historically old as is the Torah itself. Granted, we have had Jewish mysticism, since the days that Moses received the Torah from Sinai. No doubt about that, we all know. Experience, we called it prophecy, Ruach HaKodesh. And those traditions have been passed down to this day for those who embrace and observe them. That's what we call the prophetic Kabbalah, the experiential Kabbalah. Whereas, under influences happening in Europe at the time, 13th, 14th, 15th century, we had the development of what we can call the philosophical Kabbalah. And the philosophical Kabbalah became famous in its own right, in the form and structure, of course, of the Zohar and all the later Kabbalistic traditions. And even in these, in quote, mystical traditions, there arose a very strong, what should I use the word? The Hebrew word is mahloket. And I want to translate mahloket not just as a disagreement, but very, very different views of how the, in quote, secrets of the Torah are to be embraced. According to one opinion, which is embraced by the great sage Ramban Nachmanides, and students of his like what we call Rabbi Shimon ben Aderet, known as the Rashba, you had to have what was called a clear Masoret. In other words, you are like a link in a chain. What you received from your authoritative teacher put you in touch with and link with the chain, and therefore as a receiver, you are called a mikubal or a Kabbalist. That's one view. But then there was the other view, the older view. Even though it's given the name or association with Abraham Abulafia, it's clearly far, far older. And this was the secret of direct revelation, where in which instead of saying it's written in this or that book, or I heard from my Rebbe, you had the experiences yourself. The Yoredei Merkabah were certainly of this school. All the Hachamei of the Gemara were certainly of this school. Avraham Abulafia was of this school, and surprise, 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 the king of all Pashtanim was also the king of all the Sitrei Torah, and I'm referring to none less than Rabbi Yosef Karo, the famous author of the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, who would go into meditative trances on a regular basis, and he would channel the spirit of the Mishnah, the Shekhinah herself. And it would speak through his voice, and he was in a trance and give him insights and revelations. It was all written down in a book called Magid Misharim. It's readily available out there. I'm pretty sure even in English. I don't know if it's readily available in English, though, because every time I've tried to find it, it's not out, nor it's, jacked up in price. But whatever. But these are the different ways. When it comes to Torah commentaries, you had, of course, the school like Maimonides, very similar to Rashi, in which they're explaining what we call the pshat of the Torah. Many times, they're grammatical analysis. Many times, just simple moralistic teachings. Many times, they just elaborate things as written. When we look at Maimonides never actually wrote a commentary to the Torah, even though what he has spoken about or written about the Torah has been culled together and put into the form of a commentary. Some of that might even be available in English for those of you who are interested. And Maimonides' view of such things like sacrifices and the like was very, very different than the other school, what we call the secret school, represented by the likes of the Ramban Nachmani, the Rashba, and Rabbi Menachem Tziyuni. So, when we come to a section about something like the goat to Azazel, what exactly does all that mean? Well, again, you can have a number of different opinions. That's not what we're talking about here. But we are going to discuss what Rabbi Tziyuni elaborates. And that is the topic of Shedim. Shedim, we call them demons. But that which we call demons, from the Greek word daemon, which means something very different in Christian tradition than it does in the Jewish and Islamic tradition. In the Christian tradition, for those of you of that background, demons are said to have been transformed fallen angels who got into a war with God and before creation or something like that. They duked it out and God kicked out Satan, and he bought himself a new real estate property. He called it hell, and he set himself up as king. Okay, this is all the Christian theology and teachings, which, needless to say, is fundamentally different from the Jewish. Like our brothers and sisters in Islam, who know and understand the teachings of the jinn, not Barbara Eden's genie, not like that. We're talking about another race of beings that exist here in our space, time, and parallel to it. It's the best way I know how to say it. And in our section here, as a digression from the topic of Azazel, Rabbi Tziyuni elaborates very interesting details. And that is what we're going to share now. There are other sources for revelations and teachings of interactions with the Shedim world. One of the great sources, other than the Sefer Tziyuni, is the book Hesed LaAvraham of Rabbi Avraham Azulai, about a century or so after Rabbi Tziyuni. And of course, another from recent times in the 20th century, Rabbi Yehuda Fatia, who wrote a book called The Spirits Speak, Minhat Yehuda. That book is in English, and I'm pretty certain readily available. But that's the kind of book you don't want to read before you go to bed at night. It'll give you nightmares. So, who and what and where and why? What's all this talk about Shedim? Well, they're evil and they're out to get you. Dramatic pause here. That's not necessarily true. Our sages say that some Shedim, it says here, were created Beina Hashmashot, between the twilight before Shabbat, which means that they weren't completely finished in creation. Now, that's symbolic language for something very profound. And in Islam, and their understanding of jinn, they got this. Our sages have also got this, that we are dealing here with an indigenous, intelligent species that exists in or on our earth in continuity to the way the reality was before what we call the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. These entities and those who existed at that time, what we call the heavens and the earth, is what we today call the physical and spiritual domains. But we need to elaborate a little bit more on that. Rabbi Tziyuni quotes here the exact traditional Torah understanding of this. Our physical world, as we know, is made up of the four elements of earth, water, air, and fire. Does any of that sound Greek to you? Should. It comes from Aristotle. And even though it's of originally Greek philosophical origins, it's been completely embraced by all schools of Torah Judaism. And you'll even find Rabbi Chaim Vital quoting it in the Etz Chaim. We've covered that in the Etz Chaim class on Gate 50 course readily available on KosherTorah if you're interested. But as we know, you and me and Sierra lying at my side here and all the rest of us are made up of these four elements. Now, remember, the four elements are actually four states of matter: solid, liquid, gaseous, energy. Okay, we know that by science today. But these entities, we call them Shedim, are said to only be made of air and fire. They are gaseous, energetic beings without a liquid or solid state. Sometimes. Yeah, we'll get into that in just a minute. But what is that? Is there actually conscious sentient gas? Conscious sentient light? Like energy? According to our understanding, yes. That's right. And in that respect, these entities in pre-Adamic days, whether they could or would inhabit solid or liquid form, or gaseous and energy form, it was an intermingling. Just like we have today body and soul, where in which our body is physical liquid, as we know, whereas the soul, that's what we call it, don't get into the details, nefesh, ruach, neshama, none of that really matters. Its property is, if you will, like ish, or air, or something of that nature. Remember, the Hebrew word for air is, of course, not just avir, but spirit is ruach, winds. So there's a clear connection here. So these other entities could and did exist, simultaneously interacting between what we would call the physical and the spiritual. How did they do that? It was natural and indigenous for them to do that. It's really that simple. By a thought or a feeling, they would, I guess, elevate the energy frequency of their bodies and become what we would call today ethereal. Or at the same time, they would change that frequency and become physical. And if they became physical, they could take on whatever shape, size, or form that they would so choose. So this race of beings, this pre-Adamic race, was here long before us. And along comes us, the human race. Apparently there are other human beings before that. The original Adam came from out of this world. Don't doubt that. From higher dimensional planes and how that may be associated with other things, who knows? But a curious, very curious detail that Rabbi Yehuda Fatia brings down in his Minchat Yehuda in a very small section, commentary to the Zohar. He claims, remember how the Bible says that God created Adam? Well, kind of, yeah. But he brings down, Rabbi Fatia brings down from the Zohar that Adam actually had parents, a mother and a father. He's not talking about God or the Shekhinah either. Interesting secrets. But anyway, getting back to our discussion here. These entities originally inhabited the entire world. This was their planet long before modern humanity came. And then, boom, here we are. Well, that led them to completely disassociate from this physical side of things, other than when they have the need or desire to be here. It's kind of like, well, the Adamites came, there goes the neighborhood. Ugh. They moved out. I mean, if you understand how the Midrashim read, that's pretty much how it went. And it says that they then segregated themselves in places where human beings do not reside. And therefore, you'll find references them to being in isolated places. Oh, and I love what Rabbi Tziyuni writes here. He says that the traditional idea and belief that these entities would go out into deserts and places like that, where in which human beings did not reside. And therefore, they do not like human beings coming into and invading their, in quote, neighborhoods. You're not welcome. They don't like us. We took away their homes. That's the way they look at it. And with regards to the center of the earth and the inner earth, there's a lot of ideas and beliefs that many of them dwell there now, but another topic for another time. But an interesting point that Rabbi Tziyuni makes here, don't get offended by this one. He says that the Shedim, they love to get away from people, so they go all the way up into the northern areas, and they live up where it's cold, because it's not cold for them. But due to it being cold for human beings, they don't go there. So that's where the Shedim go. And he goes, for example, they very, very much populate the country called Norwegian. Norwegian. Do you ever know what that is? Norway. He says that Norway is one of the big neighborhoods for the Shedim. Sorry, Norwegians. That's what the good rabbi said back in the 1400s. I don't know if there are any more or less demons in Norway today than anywhere else, but what can I say? That's what the rabbi says. And anyway, so he explains some very, very interesting teachings about how these entities live and how and what and where they do. And again, he elaborates how, being that they have the ability to be what we would call both physical and spiritual, in certain ways they are like human beings, and in certain ways they are like what we call the angels, the messengers, the higher dimensional beings. And this is actually a teaching that the rabbi certainly did not innovate. You'll find it in books like the Avot de Rabbi Natan, famous commentary to the Pirkei Avot. And it says like this, that these entities are like human beings in three ways. They physically, sexually procreate. They eat and they drink and they die. If you're just a spiritual being, what are you dying? You go into spirit. We die. The body dies. You go off in spirit. So these entities kind of like do the same, each in their own way. In that respect, they're more like human beings. But in another way, they're more like the malachim, being that they have chosen that higher dimensional expression what we call a body made of air and fire, they are therefore and can be invisible to us. Their method of movement, our sages say that they fly through the air. Now, that really needs to be explained. Because if you think about it, they don't really have wings. You know, we always portray angels with wings because that is what is said in the biblical descriptions of angels like the seraphim and, of course, the famous cherubim. But these descriptions, even the image of the kerovim, the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant, which says it had wings, do these beings really have wings? Are they somehow half or somewhat partially human and partially what, bird? Really? That's kind of weird. Or are we dealing with an expression the likes of which is, like everything else prophetic, symbolic and metaphorical? Answer? Got me? Because I'm going to tell you this. For those of us who do practice, the Maaseh Merkavah, and you can and do have an experience of the Merkavah for real, you don't see it as Ezekiel saw it. When you project yourself through space and time to the Kodesh HaKodeshim, Isaiah the prophet did, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol did, and you see kind of different things. If you remember Rabbi Shmuel, he saw the malach called Akat Rikel Ka, Havayat Tzibaot, and Isaiah, in the same place, saw the seraphim saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. I mean, what's going on there? Did they go to different Kodeshims? No. Each one sees within the context of their own self. And Rambam, Maimonides, in his laws of explaining prophecy and the Yesodei Torah, of course we have a course on that too, elaborates all that. We recognize what we call the psychological archetypal understanding of these symbolic images. In every prophecy, just like it says, Book of Numbers, God speaks to us in riddles and images and dreams. Remember the famous dreams of Pharaoh, of Joseph, of Jacob, of course, Daniel, all this symbolic stuff. So when we have a vision and we see, in quote, wings, wings do, right? You understand aerodynamics, right? They make movement which moves air, which enables them to travel through the air. So if cherubim and seraphim have wings, does that mean they live in a gaseous atmosphere and that they're like flapping around? I don't know. Whatever experiences I might have, it doesn't look like things look 2,500 years ago and stuff. So whatever, as we would say in Brooklyn. But anyway, these entities, how and what and where they fly, what that actually means, I think that they have a method of movement within a context of an energetic flow. No, I don't think they move necessarily with what we can call the speed of thought, quantum entanglement. You needed a quantum entanglement to move at the speed of thought. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. I don't have to remember. But, we understand that there are energy meridians that circumnavigate our planet. Maybe they're the magnetic fields. And it seems that, like birds fly according to this, so we know it's real. This is not like, weirdo metaphysics. There's real stuff out there. And these entities most likely travel along those lines that get them from point A to point B to wherever they need to go based upon the Earth's natural energetic flows. That might be what it means that they, in quote, fly. But now, the third thing. It says that they're able, to a small extent, know the future. And I say small extent. Wouldn't it be great to know the future? Yeah, I would love to know what's going to happen 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years from now. No. Apparently, from how we are taught, that which is the future has its origins, needless to say, in the present. But if you think about it, the present, how long does the present exist for? Right now, when I said that, it's already in the past. What I'm about to say is in the future. As I say, it's in the present, then it goes into the past. Does the present really exist? Or is it just a moment that just is in a continuity of movement? So these entities, when we are at this level, we move with that continuity of movement. We can't see ahead. But think about if you're up here. If you're up here, you can see what's coming down the pike. Like that. Okay? And if you're higher, you can see further, etc. and so on. That's what prophecy is. But these entities, Shedim, are in that dimensional plane right above us, and they could see what's coming. Matter of fact, our sages say, who is truly, truly wise? One who could see what's coming down the pike. So, these entities could see about the distance of what we call the influence of the moon. Moon, vibrational energy, which directs towards our earth, creates like an umbrella shield psychically, and it modulates time. So at that level of consciousness, for lack of a better word, these entities are at, they could see to the end of the moon's cycle or influence, which means they could see about 30 days into the future. And, the magic side of that we're not going to get into right now. But as these entities are floating around, remember, this is their home. But they're not the only ones out there. Rabbi Tziyuni now elaborates on a group which he refers to here as the princes of the dragons. The Hebrew word is the Teli. In the Sefer Tziyuni, these Teli are mentioned. They say that Teli rule like a king on its throne. It says here, Rabbi Menachem tells us very profound teachings about the Teli. I have translated this material for those of you who read my disclosure essays, which is available on KosherTorah.com, and it's also published now in the second edition of my book, Aliens, Angels, and Demons, which is available on Amazon.com. I actually translate this whole section from Sefer Tziyuni, and elaborate on the identity of this group of authorities, angelic beings, who are the guardians of the gates, the watchers of ascent. They are the souls of the planets, as it says. They are the ones who, we have the midrash from Bereshit Rabbah, I'm pretty sure, where in which it states to every single blade of grass, you have like a malach that stands over and says to grow. Well, these Teli, they're in charge of all of that. They're in charge of everything in this domain. They are the watchers of Daniel. And Teli's reptilians. We recognize that they are also the seraphim that were mentioned by Isaiah. And when you read carefully on Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah's vision, you see very clearly that he was seeing these entities. These are the ones who go around singing, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzivaot, Melech Haaretz Kavodo. They're in charge. They're the boss. And they're the dragons. The holy dragons. The only ones, to the best of my knowledge, who understood the holy dragon concept was Jews and Judaism, and of course the Chinese and other Orientals from their tradition as well. These entities, the Teli, they are a serious bunch. They will guide the ascending soul through the appropriate gates in their ascent towards the experience of the Merkabah. So when we read about these entities, they're called by all kinds of different names. But these are what we call the guardians of the gates, the names of those who we must pass through as we proceed in expanding levels of consciousness. You don't get around them, you can't ignore them, you most certainly don't bully them around by trying to call holy names upon them. They don't like that. They work for God. They're God's guys. So therefore, like the Daniel chapter 4:14, I think, says that, what they ordained, that's what gets done. And their way of influence, of course, is in the gaseous, energetic realm, which is the power of the mind. They're the ones who influence and direct the mind. But at the same time, they can also direct and order different Shedim to act at the behest of heaven. And this is a point that Rabbi Tziyuni makes with regards to things like false prophecy and the like. We had the examples of this in, of course, the Book of Kings, where in which, if you remember, I forget the name of the king, was Rasha, and God wanted him to meet his fate, and he was going to go up to war, and he called up all of his prophets, and God said, this guy has got something coming to him. What should we do with him? One of the Malachim came and said, let me be a lying spirit in the mouths of his prophets to deceive him, trip him up. And that's a very famous story. And you can go look it up in the Book of Kings. And the lesson here is that's exactly what happened. A deceptive spirit. So these Shedim actually work with and for God. They are under the hands of the Teli. Now, with other Shedim, do you have bad guys? Yeah, you do. But this is where we get involved. Because many times human beings want to bother these entities who very frankly don't want to be bothered by us. They have a natural, I don't know if I should use the word hostility, because it's not hostility, just, we kicked them out of their indigenous home. How would you feel? All right? And in that respect, a point here that Rabbi Tziyuni makes about the Shedim. He says here, none of them do avodah zarah. They only serve God. All right? They don't lie. And he says the only time they will ever be deceptive is if someone goes after them, but they will be vindictive. If you mess with them, they'll come after you. And we read in the likes of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, Rabbi Eliezer Gemisa, of those who always tried to mess with the Shedim. And he even opens up his discussion here with using the old term that we know very clearly, necromantia. Necromantia is not just talking to the dead, but it's the manipulation of these entities. Think about it. You're minding your own business in your home. You're doing your thing. You're talking with your spouse and your kids, and you're doing your work, and you're doing whatever you need to be doing. You're busy. And some so-and-so comes into your house, puts the equivalent of a gun to your head and says, come with me. You're doing what I want you to do. Well, you got a gun to your head. You're going to do it. And he says, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want you to show me how to make money. I want you to show me the future. I want you to strike my enemy. And being that this entity is compelled, kind of does it. But then you go away not paying attention anymore. It's ticked off that you bothered it. And it's going to come after you. Those types of entities are called mazikin, which means harmers, I guess. Harmers of men. They're not the only mazikin. You do, like human beings, have bad shedim, right? And they look at human beings like we look at animals. They look at us as a source of food. Remember we said they eat. What do they eat? Well, you're not going to invite them out to McDonald's for a cheeseburger. They don't drink milkshakes. Being that they are energetic beings, they eat energy. And that actually is how we got into the topic from the Azazel scapegoat. Because when a sacrifice is made, there is a release of life force energy. And the less than nice Shedim would manipulate human beings, not giving a darn for their lives, and require blood sacrifice. Think about what the heck's all that blood sacrifice all about? Why life? Answer, is because with the release of life, there's a release of the life force energy. You can call it chi, prana, orgone, kundalini, whatever name that you want to call it. They gather that in. That's what they eat. And they would therefore manipulate certain human beings to bring them food, feed them. And a lot of what we call today evil dark magic is just that. So when you make an offering to an entity, all right, however size, shape, and form that it takes, they're siphoning the energy out of that. And anything that has its energy siphoned out comes like a vacuum. And if you touch it, get involved with it, it siphons out your energy. That is the ultimate meaning of the Hebrew word tameh, or unclean. So, this is what all of that type of stuff is all about. He even tells us that the teraphim, if you remember the teraphim that Rachel stole from Daddy Laban, he says that actually what they were, we know that they were like shrunken heads, but they were supposedly the shrunken heads of a man's firstborn children. We see the echoes of that where you would sacrifice the children to Molech, remember, in the fire. And again, the energy comes out, shrink the head, and the energy there, it gets trapped, and that you could use it actually to as a mouthpiece to speak to these entities, and they would speak through such a means. This is all necromancy kind of stuff, and of course, this is absolutely and totally forbidden by our Torah. So that's why we stay away from this kind of stuff. Why? Because you got the bad guys out there, and they don't look at you as like a holy, righteous person for God. They look at you as a McDonald's cheeseburger, pretty much. And if you're going to act in ways that give them access, well, you're going to get yours. Now, there's actually a very interesting story that he brings down here of an episode in which somebody offended one of these entities in the domain in which they lived. And he got very angry. And he started killing off all the cattle that lived in that domain. So one guy says, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to get my cattle out of here. And he's going to go cross the river, get his cattle out. And the entity stopped and said, you know what happened? You take your cattle out of here, I'm going to come after your wife and kids. All right? I have the power to suck out life. Needless to say, the guy chose to save his wife and kids, and they took his cattle. Well, what's all that about? These are all Babylonian stories. Is this all legend? Is this all make-believe? Is this all nonsense? Well, our sages and the Gemara certainly believe this. The rabbis and Kabbalists certainly believe this. And for those who have experience to this day, we know a lot of this is true. You have a lot of these mazikim who know how to tap into people. And we see it very, very much so today. I've seen it's predominantly in what we call, I guess, the New Age circle today, which people are believing they're talking to all kinds of enlightened beings, and all these enlightened beings are telling people all kinds of holy and cool stuff. And I mean, I've seen books that are allegedly, one is channeled by the angel Gabriel, the other one is channeled by the angel Michael, and yet the third one, some guy actually had the audacity to say he speaks for God directly. And you put them all together, and it all sounds like a bunch of, psychic psychobabble, in which, apparently Michael and Gabriel must be living in completely different universes or different heavens because they're describing different realities. You kind of wonder, what's going on. But anyway, this, needless to say, are expressions of the imagination of the individual. But at the same time, you do have people like real mediums who are channeling real entities. And you can always tell if an entity is kosher or not kosher, good or evil, because if there's something real, you'll be able to materialize or manifest that element. Carl Jung dealt with this with regards to archetypes of the collective unconscious, in which he recognized that individuals certainly had access to information and stuff that could not have come from any source inside their own personal history. So that's how you know something from outside is coming in. I once had a student many, many years ago, claims to me, he was a member of a group which I consider to be a cult. access to this, in quote, cult. They taught you a meditation. They gave you a mantra. And then you had to perform a ceremony of, they say, is Thanksgiving, where in which you would offer a bowl of fruit and flowers to the image of their leader. And I said, what do you mean an offering? Yeah, you just put it there and as a sign of thanks. I said, that's an outright offering to like Shedim, under the guise of this. That ceremony is asur. It's forbidden. I said, well, we can't teach you the mantra unless you do it. I can't commit idolatry to learn your stupid mantra. I learned it from a book anyway. But anyway, yeah, you got bad stuff out there. And these things tap into us today. And that's just the start of it. There's a very interesting story. Rabbi Tziyuni doesn't bring down this story, but I'll mention it to you. On Sefaria.org, and I've mentioned this before, in the book Kabbalistic, it should be in section 68 and 69. They did translate this in English, where in which you have a very interesting story. And I'll elaborate from Rabbi Tziyuni in just a minute. Where in which an actual shed was living in a house, which he said was his. And any human being that tried to come in, he killed. And the people who owned the house got very terrified and frightened. They went to the rabbis. And the rabbis went to the house and demanded that the shed come to the bet din. You bring a shed to a bet din, that's like a court. You give him a summons. You got to come to court. Okay. Allegedly, according to the story, they set up a sheet. Read this for yourself. And the entity came in and spoke, and everybody heard. Told the story. Hey, this is my house. Why? Because supposedly a female shed was married to the head of the house, this man. And when this man, and the shed, the female shed, and the man had children. Hybrid children. I'll discuss that. We still have some time. And when this man died, he had no human heirs, so we took over the property. We're his only heirs. And just because you humans don't know that we're there and you took over the property, it's still our property. Rabbis ruled against the Shedim, says you have no right taking over human property or your own place, etc. But anyway, interesting story. And the Kabbalistic brings it down that this is not just, some legend. This allegedly happened. So interesting stuff. This brings us into a very interesting topic here. Because Rabbi Tziyuni writes about this. And he states that there are those Shedim who very, very much like to have human spouses. He says something very curious that I never saw before. He says that Shedim are very modest in their sexuality. They're not voyeuristic. When they sexually copulate, they absolutely insist that it be in private, that not another shed or a human or anyone else can watch. It's only them and themselves. And that they are always, always monogamous. They're absolutely always faithful to their spouses. There's no adultery amongst them. And again, he says there's no idolatry amongst them. That's pretty profound. But they love uniting with humans, so that you can actually have that part of them, which is like it was in the olden days, where they could be half human or half physical and what we call half spiritual. Remember, they originally were like that, but they gave up that lower half. So they like to procreate with human beings, and they create hybrids. And he says very clearly, Rabbi Menachem does, right? Those who do that, they become like kings that rule over them because they have the mutual bonding of the agendas. When you look at extraterrestrial phenomena today, like alien abductions, I wrote about this starting in 1993. Boy, time flies when we're having fun. And you look at the stories of, in quote, alien abductions and the sexual experiments, wink, wink, and the things that happen, and the old stories of shed human interactions, they don't ring a bell of familiarity. It's much more than that. They're identical stories. Which kind of makes you wonder just how extraterrestrial our extraterrestrial alien abductions really are. And interestingly, remember we said here that the Shedim, they only serve God. They obey. They're not idolaters. When I wrote my original work for, about this, it was UFOs and Aliens in Light of Torah. It was published in my original Pono Derech journal, 1993. I remember in the research for that material, I read in one of these UFO magazines an article entitled "How to Stop a Negative Alien Abduction." Now, you know what? At the time, I used to think that aliens are like these physical entities, right? They come down in their flying saucers. They got their little ray guns. They come in and they zap you, like the Klingons do, and then they take you to their ship, and they do all kinds of weird stuff. It wasn't like that at all, they said. They said they're coming through your walls. It means that they're astral, not physical. And they project to you any and all size and shapes of forms in your mind. Hey, they've always been doing that. Just read the story of the Kabbalists. And all of a sudden, people are getting pregnant and the babies are taken away. I think it was Professor Jacobs wrote a book about the abductions. He was some psychiatrist, psychologist, did hypnotherapy with hundreds of different people who told them tremendous stories about the interaction of hybrids amongst us, and how these hybrids are now intermingling with us in humanity for whatever purposes that they have. Wink, wink. And who knows? Ingo Swann, in his book Penetration, claims that he met one of these entities, only he called it an alien. We know how alien they are. They're not really alien. They're actually just part of us. Part of our Earth, I should say. And these become their leaders, because they have the ability to be in all worlds. Yeah, I think that's interesting. But he also says something very interesting about them. That the Shedim are broken up amongst the different nations, countries, just like people are today. And that they are subject to the angelic influences that are over them. Funny thing about angels, the watchers. We are expecting angels to be these high and lofty and holy and sacred. Well, the Teli are. But you remember those guys from Genesis chapter 6 who came down here and took the daughters of men and all the rest of that jazz? Well, according to Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik, in an oral tradition that I heard directly from him and his son, Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, it was actually reported in an article in the Forward English newspaper way back in the 90s. He claimed that they were actually physical, humanoid people from another physical planet in this universe. He claims that it came from a 9th century book by a Rabbi Yehuda. Never got any other source other than that. Well, what happened to these guys? Allegedly, like the Shedim, they're both interdimensional in that respect. They go back and forth. And their punishment was that they had to stick around and fulfill the job that they promised God that they were going to do. And they became what we call the angels of the nations, or the heavenly Sanhedrin. Yeah, they're actually under the dominion of the Teli. And these entities, these so-called angels, they get in fights all the time. Rabbi Abraham also and Hasil Abraham says that they fight like, rams, bucking rams. Great. And needless to say, what's like a mixed martial arts fight between two angels? What's a death match between two angels? They're beating each other up. Well, they're not physical in that respect. They're psychic. And therefore, they send out their ramificational energies, which are influenced within their respective, in quote, nations and peoples, who therefore develop hostilities, which leads to the outbreak of physical wars amongst us, and that the Shedim are therefore compelled to take sides as well. And you have all kinds of psychic chaos of negative influences based upon this kind of stuff. So he adds a whole bunch of other stuff, but he concludes with something that's appropriate for us to conclude. And he states like this: Asur Gadol Yesh leYisrael ha'osek bam, como shene'emar lo tenachashu v'lo te'ononu kenisgar. It is a really big no-no. It's a sur, very big prohibition for Israel to interact with these entities. As it says, do not minachesh or do not me'onen. What exactly that means, subject to interpretation. There is in the Code of Jewish Law, section Yoradea 178, the laws of the occult. And I've taught those laws. I don't think I did it in video, but in audio. And I've put those classes readily available. You can go to our YouTube channel and type in like occult and stuff like that, or Shulchan Aruch, and you'll find those classes, 5 hours of classes on all the laws of the occult. But now, just to conclude, this explains why we are very, very careful with, in quote, dabbling with the occult, the New Age, and the like. Is there a psychic world around us? Of course. Is there expanding consciousness and our interacting, meeting actual real entities out there? Yes. Does Maimonides agree with this? You'd be surprised. You think Maimonides was this Aristotelian rationalist who absolutely denied the existence of the spiritual realm? Bulldinkies. Anybody who really understands the Moreh Nebuchim well, the God to the perplexed, recognized that Maimonides knew his stuff big time. He wasn't of the theoretical school of the Neoplatonic, Plotinus type of Kabbalah and the Zoharic tradition. He knew the old stuff very, very well. And he distinguished between the mythological and the real. And his complete dismissal of demonic and such activity was to specifically distance people's attention and therefore desire to get involved with that kind of stuff. And this is where the danger lies. Recently, I gave the class on, psychics and the mediums, and I gave you stories about how people, oh yeah, it's all cool. Let's go down to the witch doctor on the street corner there, right? My friend the witch doctor, he told me what to say. My friend the witch doctor, he told me what to do. He said, ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, ting, tang, walla, walla, bing, bang. You remember this story? You remember that old song from the 50s and the 60s? Yeah, my friend the witch doctor, boom, 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 boom. Okay, so that's about the level of the seriousness that we have to take with this. Is it real? Of course it is. But we shouldn't be tempted to go down any path of interest in that way. Now, divination. You can use psychic ways and means to recognize and see the future too. Just like these entities, like we said, are above and they can see kind of into the future. Well, we can raise consciousness to do the same thing. That's part of the Maseh Merkabah tradition. But remember, when you go off into that domain, it's crowded. It's kind of like walking into Times Square in New York City, bumping into a whole bunch of different entities. I don't know, walk the street in New York City these days. Maybe they are entities rather than who knows what. But, sorry New York, but yeah, I love New York. Not me. But long story. But anyway, this is real stuff. These entities are real. That's the point that Rabbi Tziyuni is making here. And his emphasis is, we don't mess with them because they don't want to be messed with. They have their own agenda with regards to human beings. And that agenda pretty much is, leave us alone. But we don't. We're poking around. And you know what it's like poking at like an alligator? Think about if you ever go down to Florida. You see one of these big, nasty 20-foot crocodiles, alligators, whatever, walking across the golf course. Can you imagine you say, I want to take a stick and poke in and see what happens. Okay, when we find half of you eaten alive, that's what happens. So don't mess. These entities just want to be left alone. Respect that. That's all. That's the great message here. There are other teachings with regards to Azazel and the transference of negative psychic energy and the like. But that's not the topic of what we're here to talk about tonight. Rabbi Tziyuni brings down some very profound teachings, great insights. You'll notice that I do not say, well, Rabbi Tziyuni says this in the name of, or quotes this source or that source, because he just doesn't do that. He has knowledge and experience because he was an experiencer. He knew this stuff and acted accordingly. So pay attention to what he said. For those of you who know Hebrew, and you can get the book, Sefer Tziyuni, Parshat Aharei, it's all there. For those of you who want to see the translation about the Teli, it's in my disclosure essays, available in Aliens, Angels, and Demons. Now, a couple of notices. For those of you who are not on our KosherTorah school email list, you probably want to get on, because I make a lot of the announcements there that I don't always make public. This Monday night class, dating this year, is April 19th, 2021. It's probably going to be, for a while, not permanent, the last class of Kabbalah I'm going to be publicly teaching for a while. My books are out there. My writings are out there. They're for our KosherTorah school students. Starting next week, I am planning to do a different course of study. I've always wanted to teach a course pretty much entitled Everything You Want to Know About Judaism But Had No One to Ask. We're going to go back to the basics. We're going to learn Judaism from scratch. What the Torah really says, what's really all about, etc. We'll use the 13 principles of Maimonides as a starting point and work from there. I'm planning to have only a 40-minute lesson, with then followed by a 20-minute interactive questions and answers. So, what are the questions that you're going to ask? Anything you want. No topic is taboo. And if you know me, no one's ever going to accuse me of being politically correct to not answer stuff. So, if you have my email address, arielsadok@gmail.com, that's where you get me. Send me your questions. And I will read them without your names. I don't care. But it's a matter of, getting across the information. Because I read this stuff like on feed on Facebook, and it bothers. I said, gosh, people really just don't know the basics. Here we are talking about like really deep stuff, and 101 stuff people really just don't get. So, okay, we're going to do all of it from scratch, all the rest. And yeah, as always, we'll interact with and discuss differences of religious ideas between us, Christianity, Islam, and elsewhere, why we believe the way we do, why they believe the way they do, whatever, and deal with all these issues. So, get your questions ready. Further teachings in Kabbalistic studies will be reserved for my KosherTorah school students. We'll have them, I'm going to try to do 3 mini classes a week. I'm going to try to do a mini class maybe from the book of Bahir, pick up where we left off years ago. Maybe a Kabbalistic Torah portion, something else, I'll figure it out. Those will be available for our Patreon page supporters. So if you're not a supporter on Patreon, please go there, support our efforts, thank you. And I even make the audio versions available for those who are the supporting students of our KosherTorah school at the $50 level a month and more. So if you're interested in getting in touch and keeping up with this path, direction of our KosherTorah school studies, please become a supporter. We'd love to have you. We'd love to be with you and continue to work. Remember, I'm only here for you because you are here for me. Remember to support us and get this lovely angelic t-shirt. I have them on order. They are coming. It takes a little time to get these things specially made and the like. So, thank you again for your support. Thank y'all for listening. And keep your eye on the Torah ball. A lot of weird stuff going on. And yes, if you want to bring up questions about prophecy and the Messiah and all that stuff, bring them on. Start next week. No limits. Thank you all for listening. And Be'ezrat Hashem, I'll see you all in our next class. God's blessings. Kol Tuv. Shalom.